This is episode number 165. My guest has over 1,000 people giving him money for something they could get for free. How does he do it? That's what we're talking about.
This is the Red Podcast. How to take your idea and make a name for yourself within your industry and beyond. Spread your message. Attract a following. Rise above the noise. Here's your host, David Hooper.
This is the Red Podcast, the podcast for influencers. If you're a blogger, podcaster, speaker, marketer, nonfiction author, or entrepreneur, this is the podcast for you. The focus is how to take your idea, make a name for yourself, and make money. That's exactly what my guest on this episode has done. He's got one of the top television and film podcasts. The subject is reality television. Even if you don't have a podcast, even if you have no interest in reality television, you're going to want to listen up to this because he's an expert on building an audience. His podcast has over 1,000 Patreon supporters every month giving him money so he can continue to do it, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. Rob Cesternino is my guest today.
Thank you, David. Great to be here.
Let's dive in by talking about your background, because where you are now is not where you always were and probably not where you thought you would be.
Yeah, I don't think I ever thought, even a couple of years ago, I didn't think that this is what I would be doing. But I was a guy who was really into reality TV shows all the way back from the start of Survivor. And I just said that I think I really want to be on one of those shows. I want to be a contestant on a game show. I always wanted to be on a game show. And I said, well, this is better than just like going on Price is Right or Wheel of Fortune, because this lasts a really long time. And you get to be on the game show for a long time. And that's what I wanted to do. And I ended up getting onto Survivor. And from that, I did Survivor a second time. And then after that, I was able to go and move out to Los Angeles and start working in production. And I worked in production for a number of years. And then after I hit a point where there was a lull in my work, where I was out of work for about a year and a half, that's when I started to pick up podcasting and talk about a lot of these reality TV shows that I was interested in.
I want to focus on how to stand out. I've actually worked on reality television in the casting department before, and it's important to stand out when you're competing against hundreds, thousands, maybe tens of thousands of videotapes, of emails, of recommendations. How did you get the attention of the Survivor producers? Because by the time you were on it, it was already a hot show. People knew what they were getting into, and I imagine there was a whole lot of competition.
Yeah, I think that the key to standing out in any sort of reality TV casting is an exercise like a lot of what you talk about. It's all marketing. It's all about branding yourself of here's who I am and this is how I see the world and this is what my viewpoint on everything is. And when I see a person like this, I do this. And when I hear this, I do this. And you want to just sort of like very quickly create this image of who you are in the mind of the casting person and why that would be an interesting person to watch on TV, because they don't really care how good you're going to be at the show that they're going to put you on. They're not looking to find like the best Survivor players or Big Brother players or Amazing Racers in the entire world. They're looking to find the most interesting people that they can find. And part of that is just creating that worldview of who you are.
And I imagine personality would have something to do with that. Certainly,
sure.
It does in business. It's not necessarily the people that are the best that get all the jobs. It's the people that we relate to.
Yeah, people that we relate to and people that just have like strong branding of, okay, this is what this person's look is. These are the kinds of things that they say. This is the kind of things that they believe in. The more two-dimensional you are in some degree, the better it is. Everybody wants to be three-dimensional and understood and nuanced and all that stuff. I guess that can come down the line, but when you're quickly trying to grab somebody's attention, like the more two-dimensional you are, sometimes is better.
Talk more about that. What do you mean by that?
What I mean by that is just sort of where if you can be a little bit more of a character where people's like very quickly like, oh, okay, I get it. I understand what this person is. I understand what this is about. Then people will sit around and wait to hear more. If it's sort of like a confusing sort of like, wait, what is going on? It's like this and this. when you're quickly, especially like in casting or auditions, when you're trying to capture somebody's attention so that they want to see more, I think you want to just give them a little bit more of who you are as a person quicker.
On the show, and since you've been talking a lot about reality TV and also interviewing a lot of people that have also been on reality television, have you found that level of being able to do that has been upped? In other words, the competition is more significant. It's like maybe going to graduate school rather than undergrad, and undergrad instead of high school. It's a more competitive field.
And you mean in terms of where we are in 2015 versus where we were like in 2005?
Well, actually, that's a great question too, because now everybody knows what they're getting into on reality television. If you were to go to the first cast of, let's say, The Real World, before everybody knew what it was like to live in a house and put 7 strangers in a house or whatever they said. I mean, I don't know if that first cast knew what they were getting into, but by the 10th season, we all did.
Yeah. I think that it's become a little bit trickier now because I feel like back then they weren't exactly as specific about what they were looking for. And they were probably looking for a little bit more of every man and every woman type people, where now I feel like they're looking more and more for characters because we want to create better television. So I feel like that you could throw some stuff at the wall back then and see what sticks, whereas now I think it's a little more formulaic for here's what we're looking for.
So you got the call from the casting director or the producer, whomever, and says, Rob, you're going to be on Survivor.
Yes.
What did you think was going to happen?
What I thought was going to happen was I was going to go out there and I was going to be the first person that was going to be kicked off the show. But I was just very excited because I said, okay, well, now I'll be in this world. And then I'll be able to like go to parties and stuff like that. And I was just, I didn't really care that much because I was such a big fan of the show. So that was like my best case scenario of, okay, I'll last for a couple of episodes and then I'll get to go to all the parties and meet all the Survivor people.
And what actually happened?
I ended up coming in 3rd place, and my knowledge of how the game worked, because I was such a big fan, ended up really benefiting me, and I was able to, it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be, and I was able to hang in there and have a really good run on the show.
And you had a great run after the show as well, so much so that they asked you back for a 2nd season.
Yes, and I played again a year later, which I didn't do as well. And then I was sort of at a little bit of a crossroads because my plan was that I was going to go on Survivor again and I was going to win or I was going to do great, and then people were going to want me. And unfortunately for me, that wasn't what happened, and nobody wanted me after the show was over. It's like, reality TV, it's a little bit sort of like, Kleenex. You find these people and then you use them and then you sort of just throw it away. And then if you're the reality TV person, you say, wait, hey, but what about me? Wasn't I a big deal? Doesn't anybody want to do anything with me? And the answer is usually no, not really.
I'd love to know your thoughts on that, because one day nobody knows who you are.
Yeah.
And a few weeks later, it seems like everybody's talking about you, and there are opportunities for David Letterman to interview you. And you've probably done tons of TV like that. A lot of people knew you. It's a lot of national coverage, and it happens rather quickly. It's not like you're honing a craft. It happens almost literally overnight. Just give me your thoughts on that, because you've been through it, and then you've worked with people since then, talking to them about what they've been through. How do you handle that successfully when you come into that, let's call it a lottery win?
Yeah, it really is a difficult thing to sort of wrap your head around. Some shows, it's easier than others. Survivor is a little bit different, where you go out and you record Survivor and then you come home and then you sort of watch it and it's like, okay, nobody knows who you are. And then you stay on the show for a couple of weeks and more people start to know who you are, but you're still at your job. You're still in your everyday life. Whereas a thing like Big Brother, you go and film that, and then as you're doing it, it's live, and then you come out and people are like, seemingly everybody knows you because all the people that are coming up to you are the people that know you from the show, and you can like sort of lose perspective a little bit more with that. It's kind of a crazy thing. I think you don't realize when you do it how fleeting it probably is going to be, except for like the 0.1% of the people that go through this. It's going to be a very fleeting process. It comes and it goes very quickly, and the half-life on it is always just getting smaller. Whereas if you were on the first Survivor, it was years. And now, if you were on Survivor 30, it's, weeks and maybe even less, depending on how long you were on the show for. it's an important thing to sort of like stay grounded through this, but a lot of people don't have anybody with them to be giving them that sort of advice.
Well, let's dive into what you've done since then, because you've really taken advantage of this opportunity. As you say, it could be fleeting. It has not been for you because you've got this great podcast. It's called...
Well, it has and it hasn't.
Okay, talk more about it.
I feel like the actual, celebrity of being somebody that was on a reality show was, exceptionally fleeting. Like it really, it came and it went. But the podcast, I feel like is different, where I've been able to reach out and build a community around what I'm doing, but it's not necessarily built around, my fame, quote unquote, that I had from the reality show. I feel like if that's just what it was, I feel like people would have come and left or never would have come in the first place.
Do you feel that you would have had the podcast success that you've had if you had never been on the show?
That's a great question. I feel like I would not be as successful as it has been so far because of all of the connections in this world that I was able to make. Like if I was just somebody starting from scratch, I feel like the show would be probably just as good, but I feel like I wouldn't be able to have all of the networking that I've done throughout meeting people through this process. So I have a little bit of an leg up on some of the competition because I'm an insider by virtue of having done this before.
And this networking, it didn't just happen. As we've talked here, it seems like there's a common thread of initially you wanted to be on Big Brother, but
yes,
you were on Survivor. So you went for that in a very methodical way. Mm-hmm. You played the game in a very methodical way. I imagine that you met people in a methodical way. It seems like the whole thing was planned. It didn't just happen, and I want to make sure we focus on that because some people think, oh, it just happens, and it does not.
Yeah, I mean, it didn't just happen, but there also wasn't a master plan where, 10 years ago when I was going through all this, I wasn't saying, okay, well then in 2010, I'm going to start up a podcast, and then I'm going to reach out to these people, blah, 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 blah. The subject matter has always intrigued me, and I always wanted to know more about it. And so I've always been able to, make connections in this world. And then as, it's continued to grow and grow, I've been able to meet more people in this world and have more interview opportunities and people that want to come on the show now to talk to me. Like it used to be when I started the show, I had to chase people down. And now more and more people come to me because they want to come on the show.
I'm curious to know, regarding Survivor and some of the other shows that you cover, Amazing Race, what happens after those shows? I know from working in the music industry that American Idol, sometimes you have a career, sometimes you don't. And as a matter of fact, I know the guy who works on American Idol who is actually helping these guys to develop mailing lists and to develop these relationships so they can have relationships and a career after the show ends. And people, as you say, that the half-life is pretty quick. So what happens afterwards? And do you have advice for somebody that gets in that situation, like what they can do to develop the relationships very quickly so they can take advantage of them after the cameras stop rolling? Yeah.
I mean, for people who go on these shows, it really depends on what you want to do. If you just wanted to go on the show because you feel like you have a good shot to win and you're feeling, good about your chances, then that's one thing. But if you're going on one of these shows and then you feel like it's going to be a vehicle to something, well, I would proceed with caution there, because unless that vehicle is already, ready to be launched, and this is just a way for you to garner some publicity for what you're going to do, like you're some sort of an entrepreneur and you have this product that you're trying to get out into the marketplace, and you decide to go on Survivor, and then coming off of Survivor, you talk about this thing that you have ready to go, that would be something. But I don't think that there's going to be very many cases where you have nothing going on first, and then you go on Survivor, and then people are going to have something for you on the other side. Like if you have something ready to go, coming out, you see some of these like Real Housewives people. The best one of all of these people I can't remember her name right now. Who's the Real Housewife from New York, and she has the skinny girl vodka, Bethany Frankel. And I think she had all that stuff sort of ready to go, and then she went on and did Real Housewives, and she's become a mogul because she had something and then did reality TV, and that was sort of like an accelerator for that process that she was going through. But if you have nothing and then you go on a show, don't expect to come out on the other end with something.
Right. Another reality show, I guess it's sort of a reality show. I think of like Shark Tank.
Yeah.
You have a huge platform and you can get in front of a lot of people, but if you have really nothing to offer, it's just going to make you fail faster.
Right. So if you have something going on, and if this could be a thing that helps, push you through and meet more people and get in front of the right eyeballs, it's going to open a lot of doors for you. It's not going to be enough to create a career for you.
Let's talk about your career and what it's become, because you said that it wasn't a plan, but you saw opportunity there and you took advantage of it. But again, that wasn't just random either. Can you talk about taking advantage of opportunity when it presents itself and knowing when you're getting lucky?
Well, that's hard. That's tough to do, to tell when you are doing something on your own or like when you're getting lucky. And, I can't even say that myself, that I've been able to tell the times when things that I've been fortuitous and other times where, this was due to my own planning or whatever. For me, there was no real straight through line of okay, well, here's, this plan to be successful. I started doing this thing. I didn't know what I was doing in terms of starting a podcast. I was doing it, in a spare bedroom in my house. I was doing it with my wife when she had time to do it. We were sort of just doing it around the schedule of, I wanted to do podcasts all the time. She would I don't feel like doing one right now. So we sort of were at the mercy of her schedule because I didn't have anybody else to talk to. So I would talk to my wife on the shows, and I would just do it around trying to go on job interviews and trying to find work. And sort of, there was a couple times where if I would have gotten a job that I went on an interview for, I would have quit doing the podcast because I needed to work. And I was lucky that I was so unemployable by a lot of these people that I went to go see that I just never had the, full-time employment that would have taken me away from doing the podcast at the time that I started it. It's a thing where I was seemingly unlucky at the time, but it turned out to be the best thing that happened to me, where so many jobs that I applied for, just anything so I would be working, it would have completely taken me out of the time where I was really experimenting and learning the craft of making a podcast.
Yeah. I love that. It's like me saying that I just found out about you late in the game, and you look back on it, you can see how all the pieces fit together. But when you're in the middle of them, no way. Definitely does not seem like that.
Yeah, absolutely not. Where the thing really started to take off was about a year and a half, where I was working at a job, and I was working, I had been full-time, and I had sort of cut my hours back to focus on my podcasting. And I, got into a little bit of I was working for a friend, and I told him that I wanted to cut back my hours because I wanted to, focus on podcasting more. And he got really annoyed and was like, I can't believe that you're not excited about what we're doing here at the company. Well, why would you not want to be a part of this? And I was like, well, I like the opportunity here, but I really want to focus on my own stuff. And a couple of weeks after that, he was actually let go by the company. And then a couple of months after that, I was ultimately let go by the company. And I was at a point where I'm like, well, now what do I do? And that was when I started doing the podcast full time about a year and a half ago.
Did things change for you once you started putting everything into the podcast, going full time without that exit ramp?
Yeah, things really did change because I said, okay, well, this is going to be a thing where I'm going to, commit and go all in on. And whereas before I used to say you don't want me doing the podcast full time, because then if I got to do the podcast full time and then I got to figure out ways to monetize it, and you guys are there's going to be commercials and stuff like that. This is better for the listener that I don't do it full time. Obviously, I was wrong about that. I'm wrong about a lot of different things. And for me to do it full time was the best thing for the podcast.
I imagine that's pretty scary, though, when you're giving a product, being the podcast and other things that you do, to somebody, and your money's coming from another source, such as a job, to have the job go away or to somehow flip your opinion on that and then ask your listeners, oh yeah, hey guys, by the way, I know we made deal A, but how about ponying up some money so I can continue this? What was that like?
It was scary for me because I thought that the audience was going to reject that and say, hey, look, like we like the podcast. We don't like it that much.
Right.
You figure it out. Don't be coming here asking us for charity. I found the opposite to be the case. And I felt like things really changed at the point where I sort of announced on the podcast that I did a podcast where I was talking. I answer questions a lot from the audience of people that are listening to the show. And I talked about how I had this experience where I was working full time at this company. They laid off my department, and I'm going to pursue doing the podcast full time. And part of the ways that I'm going to try to monetize that was by getting set up with Patreon, which is a service which allows people to do crowdfunding on an ongoing basis. So like a Kickstarter, but you get to, recurring every month or every time you put out a new piece of content. I was able to sort of like enroll the audience in this journey that I was about to go on, where I was like, I don't know if this is going to work. I don't know what this is really going to turn out, how it's going to turn out, but I'm scared, and let's see what happens. And if you want to help support this journey that I'm about to go on of trying to do the podcast full time, here's the way that you can do it. It was a interesting enough story, I guess, for the people that were listening, and they wanted to go on board. And that was where this really started to take off. And I was at the time like saying to myself, boy, if I could get to $1,000 a month of crowdfunding, that would really be great. If I could get to $1,000 a month. This weekend, I just passed 1,000 people that are crowdfunding my podcast. So it's really been really a fantastic ride.
And 1,000 people, it takes a lot to get 1,000 people to give you money. But with that said, we're not talking tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people for you to be able to do this full time. It's just 1,000 people.
Right.
I think that's a great number to focus on because it seems attainable, but again, I don't want to make it look like it's easy because
and 1,000 is after a year and a half. Like I was, ecstatic when there was 100 people that were, crowdfunding to the podcast.
Was there a tipping point where there was enough social proof and people had seen like, yeah, this thing's going to work, so they came in later, kind of like those undecided voters that want to be on the winning team?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure. It's been sort of steady going through over the last year and a half. I can't say that there was a point where people said, oh, okay, well, now this is a success, so let me help support it. If anything, it almost seems like the opposite, where if it was going to be a success, you almost feel like maybe less people would support it. Like, oh, they're doing okay. We don't need, I don't need to support it too. And luckily that hasn't happened also. No, I don't think there's been one sort of a tipping point where it was just sort of like, it was like a windfall of new supporters that came on because we reached a certain milestone.
I think that's a great piece of advice that you're giving about this. A Patreon campaign or any kind of donation campaign, though, is to let people be a part of it. Let them be a part of the success. I think that's why Kickstarter is so great. You get to see somebody build a project, build a product, a service, whatever it is, and they get to be part of it. They are making it happen along with you. And that sounds like that was your approach.
Yeah. And the big thing I would tell people about is make sure that there is a story, and that's really what marketing is about, of, getting people engaged with this story. And the story is about you and your journey and what you're trying to do. And that's why it's so important, like on these Kickstarters or these Patreon, there's a video, make the video. And a lot of people just sort of like either skip that or they half-ass the video of what they're trying to do. But the video is your opportunity to tell your story of what people are giving their money to. What is the end result of this going to be, and why people should be getting to be a part of what you're doing. And just whiffing on that, I think, is probably the biggest mistake that most people make with crowdfunding.
Speaking of videos, that's actually how you came into my radar. I saw you at New Media Expo at the Podcast Awards. You were the only guy, I felt, who really owned his situation, owned winning of the award. And you did that. One of the ways that you did that was taking up a camera on a selfie stick.
Yes.
And bringing your audience
Periscope
into this. Yeah.
Yeah.
So talk more about that, because this seems to be a trend. And when we're talking about growing a podcast, monetizing who you are, you've brought your audience in a way that not a lot of people are doing.
What I do is not really a podcast. You know, I want to make following what I do into as immersive an experience as possible. So it's not just about listening to me talk to somebody. It's also about, you know, going on social media after and being part of like this ongoing conversation and posting in, you know, different Facebook groups and just being interactive with me and what I'm doing and the guests on my show, and being sort of part of this meta world that lives outside of the podcast also. And so for me, it was about letting the audience know, hey, I'm going to Vegas, we're going to do this. And then the people that were watching that live felt like they were sitting there watching me, and they were all chatting with each other on Periscope. And then, you know, they were voting every day, and we got everybody, you know, sort of spreading the word about the vote. And really with this, they did it. I didn't do very much except for sort of like say, hey, remember to vote. But they were the ones that were actually out there voting. And they made all of this happen. So for all of us, it was sort of like a shared victory in what we were able to do.
Right. It's like you had a door that you held open and allowed them to walk through it if they wanted to.
Mm-hmm. And we did do it. If this was a like academy of voters and not a popular vote, no, I would not have had the top award at the Podcast Awards. It definitely would not have happened. I'd like to think that maybe we get nominated, but probably there are people who are better at what they do than what I am at what I do. And unfortunately, you know, or fortunately for me, that's not how this particular award works. It was a popular vote, and I'm very happy that it was.
Well, it was a popular vote, but you were going against some heavy hitters.
Yeah.
NPR guys that I know were getting probably 500,000 downloads per episode, if not more.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, it's not necessarily about just the sheer number of ears that listen to his show. It's really comes down to the, you know, capturing the, you know, hearts and minds of the people that listen to those shows. And I think I've been able to do a better job of that than some of these bigger shows in terms of really engaging that core audience, where I was up against Serial, which is, you know, the biggest podcast ever. And I loved Serial. Serial was really fun to listen to. And I listened to the whole thing, but there just weren't enough people that cared to make sure Serial won an award. And luckily for me, there were enough people that cared to see that Rob is a Podcast won an award.
Right. And I want to take it back to that 1,000 people that you've got on Patreon right now. Mm-hmm. It's not a crazy big number. Not to say 1,000 people is easy to get them to hand over money or to get them to vote, but it is doable.
Yeah.
So for somebody who's going to start a podcast, he's got his own business, he's trying to get into the personality marketing thing, build a business around him, around his experience, and how he can help others. If you had to start again, where would you start? How would you suggest somebody get maybe 10 really excited, engaged listeners?
Well, I think it has to start with great content. I think a lot of people come in and they start a podcast and they want to start monetizing from day one. And that's just not how that works in this, you know, particular method of communication, because I find that the monetization from crowdfunding or things like this comes as a way of people want to thank you for what you've already done. Where a new person comes in and they want to start saying like, all right, here's the show. Here's what this is going to be about. This is going to be great. Let me tell you about what we have our Patreon so you can support the show. And people are like, well, what am I supporting? And whereas I started really trying to monetize the podcast about 3 or 4 years into that journey, where people had been listening to shows for free for 3 or 4 years and then wanted to come on board and figure out a way like, hey, I wish I could, thank you more here. Please let me try to repay you for all of the entertainment or all the content that you've given me already to this point. And I actually recently have had a lot of people come on as patrons because there was this whole big Survivor vote that just happened. I just got through a really crazy period of recording podcasts where Survivor was voting people back onto the show and letting them campaign. And so I interviewed 26 of 30 potential people that were trying to get back onto the show. And I did like a 45-minute interview with just about all of these people. And I just podcast wall to wall for days on end. And a lot of people came on to say, well, let me become a patron to thank you for all of this content that you've done now at this point. The way that it works is that that's the way people are thanking you for what you've already done as opposed to what you are going to do or what your show is going to be about.
Earl Nightingale had a famous saying about that. He said a lot of people want the heat without putting the wood in first. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what you're talking about. You deliver the product, but you've got to trust that money is going to be there. So any advice for somebody who's skeptical of this and they think, well, this is working for Rob, but it's not going to work for me because people are cheap. Why are they going to pay for the milk?
Well, I would say that you're probably doing it for the wrong reason if you're concerned about the monetization from the start. I think you start with a passion. Because there are probably easier ways to make money than podcasting. So start with a passion, and the hours are probably better at a lot of other jobs than podcasting. But start with a passion, start with what you love, do it because you love it, and do it for long enough that you build an audience and a community and, interact with that community, keep them engaged, and eventually the monetization will come. But it won't come quickly.
The podcast is called Rob Has a Podcast.
Yes.
And you cover specific reality shows. And is that always changing, or is that something that's going to be constant?
Yeah, for Rob Has a Podcast, I cover pretty much all of the competition reality TV shows that are strategic, such as The Survivor, Big Brother, Amazing Race. And then, from time to time, new shows pop on or shows come on like Celebrity Apprentice and stuff like that. So we cover all that stuff on Rob Has a Podcast.
And if you're interested in seeing how to interact with your audience, check it out, robhasapodcast.com. You've also got the website, robhasawebsite.com.
Yes.
You've got a lot of stuff. What's next for you?
Well, the new venture that I've taken on about a year and a half ago, around the time I started doing this full time, was that all the reality stuff is great, but I want to talk about scripted TV too. So post-show recaps is sort of taking the Rob Has a Podcast model and moving it over to talk about stuff like Game of Thrones and Walking Dead and different scripted TV shows. That's postshowrecaps.com.
Let me ask you one final question.
Yes.
Regarding leveraging something, and I think you've done a great job of that, leveraging Survivor fans or competition reality show fans and bringing them over to something that's related. Anything specific that you have to add about somebody, how they could take advantage of leverage or of momentum somebody else is going and bring it into their fold?
Well, I think that one of the things that I've been able to do well with doing recaps of the TV shows is that you have these TV shows which are on the air, but they don't always do a great job of interacting with the community of fans that follow these programs. Like Survivor is on the air, but there's not really a great place for people to go and interact and talk about Survivor. And, there are different message boards and stuff like that. But as far as podcasting about TV goes, it's just a natural thing that it happened. There's an event, and then people want to hear about that specific event. So recaps of TV shows is just something that really just goes very naturally with podcasting. So it also is like a weekly reminder, a thing happens, go get this new thing. Where if you were podcasting about something that just didn't have some sort of a cyclical event that was attached to it, I'm trying to think of if you were podcasting about knitting, there's no thing, knitting event that happens every single week, or there's all sorts of business things where there's no weekly thing that happens that you're talking about. You're just sort of like, okay, this news is happening, let me talk about this.
Right.
And so there's never a point with me, except for like the off season, where it's like, oh, what am I going to talk about this week? It's like there's always a thing. You're always covering, the recent events.
Right. Well, I love that. It's finding a hole in the market and then filling it. So even if it's not something that's a cycle, such as a television show or television series, you can still do that and take advantage of that same kind of concept. Rob, thanks so much for being here. This has been fantastic. I think there's nobody better when it comes to podcasting and building that community and having engaged fans, because, as they say, you vote with your wallet. And that, to me, is the pinnacle of somebody who's really, really into what you're doing, and you've got them in spades.
Well, I mean, we're having such a great time right now. There's, Survivor I've been talk about being lucky. I've been very lucky to hitch my wagon to a show that has, continued to perform. Survivor's going into its 15th year. It did well in the ratings this past year. Everybody's excited about this vote that they just had to send people back to the show. So hopefully I'll just continue to be very lucky with the material that I'm covering.
And did you get in on that vote to get back on the show?
No, it was a second chance. It was all people that only played once before. So I already had my
you'd already
chance.
had your shot. Well, maybe the third time's the charm.
I'm good. I'm happy doing what I'm doing. I feel like people are always trying to talk to me about like, well, when are you going to go back on Survivor? When are you going to go back on Survivor? It's like, first off, I feel like I'm on every season because I get to comment on everything that's going on. I get to look smart. I never have to go out there and actually put up or shut up and look dumb. I'd have to shut down my whole operation to go away to some horrible place. Unless I went out and won the $1 million, like there's only things could happen that are worse than what I'm doing now.
Yeah, but you want to talk about having a great audience and people that would be pulling for you, man. You would definitely have a great heads up, I would think, as far as
unlike
that.
The podcast awards go. Survivor, unfortunately, does not come down to a popular vote. So it really comes down to just the vote of the people that are out there.
We'll get you on American Idol, maybe.
Yeah, maybe that I could finally that I could put some of that to good use.
Well, Rob, thanks for being here on Red Podcast.
Yeah, thanks so much, David.
You've been listening to Red Podcast, Real Entrepreneur Development. Subscribe today using iTunes, Stitcher, or via RSS at redpodcast.com.
And Dave, I'm sorry, I lost the train of I lost the train of the question.
Why are they going to pay for the milk if the cow is free, or whatever that saying is? .com. You've also got a blog. Rob has a blog. .com. No. I can cut that out if you want. Okay. Oh, Rob has a website. You got a lot of stuff.
Yes. It's all Rob has a website.com.